Welcome to The Struggle is Real, a show for 20-somethings that are trying to figure out adulting. I'm your host, Justin Peters. Each episode, we focus on solving a problem that we will face throughout this defining decade that wasn't covered in the classroom. This could include topics about our career, health, relationships, and money. Let's get into it. For many of us, student loans are a huge financial burden throughout our 20s and well into our 30s. Student loans can be hard to keep up with because payments can be the same amount as mortgages. But unlike mortgages, I'm guessing you didn't spend too much time understanding this debt before agreeing to it. I know that was the case for me. I went through all of college without understanding the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans. And don't worry, if you're still in that boat, we'll get right into that at the beginning of this episode. In college, it's easy to forget about how we are financing our current stage of life, but now we are left holding the bag. Although student loans can be complex, deciding on a repayment strategy doesn't need to be. There are a couple key questions to ask yourself to put you down the right path. We'll explore those questions and more on today's episode. Joining me is Andrew Paulson. Andrew is a student loan consultant and co-founder of studentloanadvice.com. He has a passion for helping people find solutions to complex financial problems. In this episode, Andrew and I will get straight into it. We start with the basics. What are the key pieces of information you need to know before deciding on a repayment strategy? Then we'll discuss repayment plan options, qualifying for student loan forgiveness, and balancing student loans with your other financial goals. I hope you enjoy my conversation with the certified student loan professional, Andrew Paulson. Super excited for you joining me on the podcast. I didn't realize how fun researching this topic was going to be. I really didn't know a whole lot about student loans, and to give some flavor of where, or some context to where I was coming from, I bootstrapped my way through college. I paid a lot of college through scholarships, student loan, or the, what's that one program, the, when you work on campus.
Well, don't they give you a big reduction in tuition, right? By doing that.
Yeah, they work study grant. There we go. Work study grants. And I took subsidized loans, but that was really it. And then every semester, I just tried to pay the difference with what I saved from the semester prior. So coming out of college, I really didn't have that much in student loans. I gave myself that 6-month runway after graduating before it became interest bearing to get that amount saved up. And then the day before that it was going to become interest bearing, I just paid off the difference and moved forward. Nice. So I never really had the chance or really the impetus to dive deep into student loans and really to understand how I would go about repaying for my student loans. That was until researching for this conversation. Super interesting, but also I can see why people would be so overwhelmed if they were in that situation because it is so complicated. And I took student loans and I don't know so many of these things up until then. So I think a great place to start in this conversation is probably just the basics. So if a friend came to you, this panicked friend, knowing that come January, they're going to have to start paying on their student loans, where would you start? What information would you start looking for?
Yeah, let's, really a bit of 101. First thing you want to do is understand how many loans do you have? What are the balances? What are the interest rates? Are they subsidized? Are they unsubsidized? Are they federal student loans? Are they private student loans? So that's the very first thing, is take an inventory of where you're at. If you don't know what all those are, if you have federal student loans, you can go to studentaid.gov, log into that portal, and it's going to tell you all your federal student loans. And if you had some private student loans, some people end up taking those out for undergrad or graduate programs. You can find those by just getting a credit report. And on your credit report, it's going to show all of the different loans that you have. But that private servicer as well should be sending you a loan statement and letting you know that, okay, payments are coming up. And for most of you that are out of school, you're going to know who that is because you're starting to make significant monthly payments to that. And so if we kind of peel that back a layer, the two main types of student loans out there are federal and private. So, like you were talking about, you took out some subsidized student loans. So there's two main federal student loans. There's subsidized and there's unsubsidized. Subsidized just means that while you're in school, there isn't any interest that's accruing on them. For your unsubsidized, the minute that you take those out, those begin to accrue interest. So let's say you had a $10,000 student loan. It's got a 7% interest rate. Each year it's growing about $700 a year. That's even while you're in school. So that's starting to accumulate some interest. Okay. You have variable interest rates. You have fixed interest rates. For most of you that are borrowed federally for school, they're going to be fixed. So that means that they're not going to change. Even as interest rates over the years have actually gone down, the government doesn't drop your interest rate with that. It stays level at whatever it is at the time that you took it out. And depending on when you borrow, they could be lower, they could be higher, but they're generally in the 6 to 8% range for grad school. And for undergrad, they're in the 3 to 5-ish range just for federal student loans. And then private, they're a little bit more across the board, where sometimes they're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Some are fixed, some are variable. So that's just a high level sense of the student loans that you take out. And usually there's a maximum threshold that you can take out at the undergraduate level federally. And then whatever you need above that, you can have your parents actually sign off and take loans on your behalf, or you can take out private student loans to help finance your education. And if you do get to the graduate level, there is no limit on the amount that you can borrow federally. You could borrow $250,000 per semester, if that was the tuition, the books, your housing, and all that in there. I mean, I'm not saying you would, but you hypothetically can. So that's kind of a very high level of the different student loans. And then from there, you got to figure out, okay, what do I need to start paying on these? What are my different options? And there's a number of options for federal student loans, and there's a number for private. You can be doing interest only. You can be doing payments where you're actually covering your interest and your principal, or you could even be on a repayment plan that's based off of your income, which can tend to be pretty beneficial for those of you that are just out of school starting to make payments.
Yeah, makes sense. I think we'll get into a lot of that conversation around repayment strategy, but let's talk current state. So I looked at some stats. You can correct me if there's anything wrong. I think I think I got this from one of your blog posts actually, but it's like $1.7 trillion in student loans that are out there. It's only like second in debt behind mortgage, which is absolutely insane to me that is still the case. And I think actually I can just find it here because I'm pretty sure I wrote it down. So 45 million borrowers out there. So 1 in 5 adults have student loans, which crazy as well. And then do you know the average student loans, like how much debt people are coming out with whenever they graduate school?
Yeah, I think it's like $36,000 to $40,000 is on average what people on average take out.
Wow.
From school.
Yeah. And clearly that might be weighted down too by some people that only take a little bit of loans out, maybe because they were only in for a semester, or, they got everything paid up until maybe their last semester or something like that. So I'm assuming it might be a tad higher for most people. So I can totally see why this is an anxiety driven debt out there. But luckily for most people right now, 92% of the loans are federal loans, and the current state of federal loans they're in forbearance. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and where we're at with student loans?
Yeah. So what happened March of last year when COVID hit? All federal student loans, I'm talking about direct federal student loans, payments were put on hold, and interest was also halted. So those of you that have FFEL loans or family federal education loans, it's another type of federal student loan that was issued back from 2010 and earlier. Those you actually had to make payments on, but the majority of you out there that have these direct federal student loans, you haven't been making payments and haven't had interest on those since March of last year. And that was put in place, as an emergency measure during COVID to provide you with relief, for those of you for a variety of reasons, but essentially to help you out in terms of for your financial situation. And those payments are set to resume this coming February 2022. And that that payment resume was pushed back about 6 different times. At first, it was, okay, they're going to come back at the end of 2020. And then it was, okay, actually early 2021. And then it was September. And now they have said that February is the final date. So that means you're going to have to start making payments on your federal student loans again. And those interest rates are going to kick in. So not only have you not had to make payments, but this has been a huge benefit for those of you, with your interest rates, because it's probably saved a lot of you thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars in interest costs alone.
Wow. So you mentioned last year is March of 2020. So just in case you're listening in 2022 right now, just wanted to give a little bit of clarity to that. So as of November 2021, we are 21 months into this. Sounds like this is a for sure thing. This repayment is going to start come February 2022, or is there a potential for another push out?
I wouldn't doubt that things could get changed up, right? Like there's been so many changes in the student loan realm, but because this comes from the Department of Education, government lawmakers, they can change things. But in the past, when they ended up moving the goalpost back and moving back the payment resume, they've usually given us a 2-month time period. Just, so because there's 44 million, 40 million people that are going to start making student loan payments again come February. That's a massive amount. Like you said, it's about 1/5 of the country that are starting to make payments again. So there's a huge administrative side of things behind that. And so I feel like if they were going to move it back again, we would already know that they would do that. Yeah, so I feel like this is the final one, and I would definitely plan that it will be as well.
Okay. Have you been advising people to continue to pay on their loans during this time, or do you tell people to hold off on paying loans right now?
Yeah, it depends. If you are going to, I know we'll talk about this more, but if you're not doing a loan forgiveness program and you're just paying these off, it's hard not to be starting to pay on these, because these are interest-free loans.
Yeah.
So I think about it from a perspective, as long as you're paying yourself first, you're putting money into those retirement accounts, and then, using money to start paying down on your student loans. I think that's a great idea right now. So for those of you that are just going to pay them off, yes. And then for those of you that are utilizing loan forgiveness, like let's say you're going to do public service loan forgiveness, the 10-year tax-free forgiveness track, you should be putting that money on, saving that on the side, because anything that you pay towards that loan, doesn't come back to you at the end of the day. So that means I'm putting money in other areas all along the way. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think even if you do want to start setting that money aside, it probably made sense for you to hold on to that money and put it into an emergency fund, or I think you call it like a side fund. I've heard you mention that a few different times as well, because why not hold that money right now? You're not accruing interest. You're not really doing yourself a whole lot by paying on your loans right now. I also found out, and correct me if this is wrong, but you could actually ask your servicer for that money back if you did make payments over this last 21 months. Is that right?
Exactly. So a lot of my clients were kind of freaked out, March of 2020, when they said you don't make any payments, and they just couldn't wrap their head around that. They're like, okay, there's no way that this actually happens, because if you're doing, a loan forgiveness plan, you have to make a certain amount of payments, and the way that those count is by making a monthly payment. But because you're not making a payment, people were scared that they weren't going to be getting a count or a credit towards one of those loan forgiveness programs. So they made those monthly payments, despite hearing from the servicer that they didn't need to. But then, as news has come out that yes, those will count, you can actually call up your loan servicer and have them rebate that money back to you.
And they are required to do that?
Yes. Okay. Yes, they are for direct federal student loans.
Okay. What's the difference between direct and indirect? I didn't really get that.
Oh yeah. So you're talking about direct and FFEL. So when you're going and you're taking out student loans right now, when you're getting a federal student loan, you're going to get a direct student loan, which means it's issued directly from the federal government. Okay, so that's everybody ever since 2010. If you borrowed back before 2010, what you might have taken out was a family federal education loan program, which was also issued directly by the federal government, but it was backed by a private bank or a private lender at that time. Whereas now and guaranteed by a bank, whereas these direct student loans are actually guaranteed by the federal government. So that's a little bit of the difference. I know, very nuanced, kind of a complex thing, but most people before 2010, about 75% of people, their school, they would offer them these FFEL instead of direct, because about 75% of schools, those were the loans that they were issuing back then. So, some of you are going to have those FFEL loans, but most of you are going to have those direct federal student loans, and the way that they're treated is a little bit different, which can make it a little bit more complex on the way you pay them or the loan forgiveness and even interest rates, because some of these FFEL loans that were issued back before the recession of 08 and 09 were variable. So some of you got lucky. You've got super low interest rates below 3%. And then some of you ended up having higher, like somewhere in the 7, 8, or 9% range. So
there's so much nuance in this space, man. I'm assuming you come from a pretty deep background on student loans. I'm guessing you maybe worked through student loans yourself. What's your story?
Yeah, I got into school and I studied accounting and finance. I actually, for a time, wanted to be a professional golfer. And I got to college and I realized that there's only 200 people right now that are playing on the PGA Tour. And there's 50 million people in the US that are playing golf. And I just ran those odds and realized that I needed to start focusing on my academics and started to really shift my focus and do that. But I wanted to study accounting because it would give me a good foundation of businesses, because I liked how they run, how do they become profitable? And I was just really curious in that and was interested in entrepreneurship. But I was fortunate where I had a lot of scholarship from athletics and from academics, that I didn't come out of school after my undergrad and my graduate degree in accounting with student loans. But I met my wife, who she had student loans from nursing school. And so that was kind of our first, step into student loans and trying to figure out what we do. Do we just pay these off? There's a high federal interest rate. Should we, look at loan forgiveness? Because as a nurse, there's a number of forgiveness programs that she could pursue in there. And at the end of the day, we just decided to pay them off. And then I had taken a job at that time in the finance world, worked in the investment industry. And then I was approached by an organization named the White Coat Investor. It's a large financial literacy platform that was created as a blog to help doctors. And then it became dentists, healthcare. And then it just kind of spanned to high earners, of helping them manage their money and not get ripped off by financial people. And they had so many people that had student loans, large, think mortgage-sized student loans. And they're like, hey, Andrew, we know you've got a background in finance, something about student loans, having witnessed it firsthand. Would you be interested in helping us set up this business? And I was like, yeah, I've been doing my corporate job for 3 years and I'd love to do that. So I came from this background of experiencing student loans firsthand, having, an understanding of, finances and spreadsheets. And then I actually did a designated course that's called the Certified Student Loan Professional, which is a specialized course, really the gold standard in student loan advising, so I could really round out my understanding and be able to give people good advice and recommendations on how to get out of student loan debt as soon as possible in the best way.
What I'm getting from that is you're legit, man. You're legit. Well, let's get into some more nuance now and kind of picking a repayment plan. And you had a great blog article out there where you lined out 4 different questions. I want to work through these questions, and I think that's going to triage us into both forgiveness and refinance. So first up, you asked the question, are you going for loan forgiveness or paying them off? What are you looking for in this question whenever you're asking that?
Yeah, it depends on what kind of a job you're in,
Okay.
right? Are you working at a for-profit entity? Are you working at a non-for-profit? Are you working at a 501c3? Are you working for a government institution? That's kind of the first the first thing to look at, because if you're working at a for-profit entity, Amazon or Microsoft, whatever it may be, you're probably just going to have to pay these loans off. And you need to be focused on a strategy that's going to minimize your interest charge over time. And, kind of like what you did is like, I got done with school. Okay, I'm going to pay these off as soon as possible.
Yep.
But for some of you that are going to be working in the public sector at a non-for-profit or a 501c3, there's a multitude of loan forgiveness options out there for you. And they're very, very beneficial. And for most, if you can be on one of those forgiveness programs, the finances and the number side of things are almost always going to work out in your favor if you do them.
Okay. That makes sense. And I think that addressed the second question here is, are you planning to work at a nonprofit, 501c3 or private practice? So let's skip through that. Now you have this question, what is debt to income ratio? What are some general guidelines around that? What are you looking for that might give some people or steer some people in a certain direction?
Yeah, so I think that we would start with, let's say your student loan debt and your income are 1-to-1. You're making $50,000 and you took out $50,000 of student loans. Usually, if you're making as much as you owe in student loans per year, or you're making more than what your student loan balance is. So let's say in that case, you only had $25,000 of student loans. That's usually a recipe for someone who should just pay them off. And you could probably do that in a pretty quick manner, and get those behind you, relatively quickly and in a 3 to 5 year time period.
Sure.
Okay, so that's the first stretch. And then let's say that, you went to grad school and you took out $100,000 of student loans, and you still, you're only making $50,000, you're making $50,000 a year. Now your debt to income is 2-to-1. This is where it gets a little bit more murky in terms of your options. You can you can start paying those down, but I'm assuming that's a couple $1,000 a month monthly payment, might be a lot of your monthly paycheck. So that's typically where you can start looking at some of your loan forgiveness options. And if you're working in the public sector, it's usually a shoe-in for looking at one of the loan forgiveness programs named Public Service Loan Forgiveness, because you can work 10 years and you can make small monthly payments that are based off of your income. You're making $120,000 a year, it's 10 grand a month, and it's based off of 10% of what your monthly paycheck is. So you'd be making, about $1,000 monthly payment over a 10-year period of time. Maybe so you can end up saving a significant amount if your debt to income is more, if your debt is really more than your income. That's when I would look at employment if you were working in the public sector. And then there is one other track that I see people doing. If your debt is 3 times or 4 times or 5 times, maybe you went to school, maybe you went to graduate school and you didn't end up graduating, and you're making $50,000 a year and you took out $250K and your debt is 5 times your income. There's a loan forgiveness track that's called taxable loan forgiveness, where you can make small monthly payments for 20 to 25 years. And then at the end of that period of time, you can get your loans forgiven. But the catch with it is that it's taxable. So let's say you had $200,000 forgiven in 20 years time. That's going to get added on your tax return as income. And it's probably going to get taxed. You're probably going to have a $75,000 or $100,000 tax bill in that year. But I do see some people that are also looking at that case. So that's a huge, factor when you're determining the way to address your student loans is, what is your debt to income?
Yeah. And let's double click on this question, because now I have a few other questions that stemmed out of your answer there. When we talk about debt, you're talking about federal debt, correct? Because you can't go through one of these forgiveness programs if you have private debt.
Yeah, exactly. Federal student loan debt.
Cool. So once again, whenever you went up to the front, at the front of this conversation, we were talking about finding your balances, the amount of loans that you have, if they're federal or private. This is all good information to start collecting so that you can start answering these questions that we lay out here. And then your last question that you had is, are you married and is your partner also working as well? I'm assuming that figures into how you file your taxes, therefore what your income might be.
Exactly. And it's it's not as applicable if you're in the pay down mode where your debt and your student loan debt and your income, federal student loan debt and income are equal. That's usually, it doesn't, your household situation, way you file your taxes doesn't really apply, but it can make a world of difference if you have federal student loans. And if you're looking into one of the repayment plan options, like let's just say you make $50,000 a year, and then your spouse makes 250. It brings up your household income to $300,000 a year. Well, if you're on a payment plan that's based on your income, like an income-driven repayment plan that you need to be on if you want to pursue one of those loan forgiveness programs, your payment is going to be based off of you and your partner's income if you're married. And that can be a huge monthly payment, if it's looking at $300,000 of income versus $50,000 of income. But there's a couple of ways that you can get around that. And it's specific to different repayment plans. So little nitty gritty, but there's 4 different income driven repayment plans. And 2 of them, you can actually exclude your spouse's income through filing your taxes, married filing separately. So in that case that, you're making household income of 350 or 300,000, you're making $50,000 and they're making 250, you can actually exclude their $250,000 of income from your payment calculation. So it's just based off of your $50,000 of income for the year, which can, drop your payment significantly. But it gets a little more complex in terms of, well, if you file your taxes married filing separately versus jointly, there's a difference in tax liability. But those are like the really common things. I built a calculator to help go through those calculations and project that out over years.
Interesting. Let's, I'll grab that link from you. I'll drop that calculator into the show notes in case anybody's interested in those. But now let's jump into forgiveness. You kind of opened that tab up and gave us a lot of flavor to it already. So it sounds like the first thing you're going to do is, if you decide to go the forgiveness route, having it at minimum a debt to income ratio above 1. If not, it probably doesn't make sense, because forgiveness, to be on a forgiveness plan, you have to be on an income-driven repayment plan, or IDR, and that's based on either up from somewhere between 10 to 20% of your income, just depending on which one of those 4 income-driven repayment plans you're going to have. So if you're less than 1 in that debt to income ratio, this conversation, or this part of this conversation, probably isn't for you. But if you are, let's talk a little bit about that strategy. It doesn't, I'm guessing it doesn't make sense to pay for any more than whatever your minimum payment is. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And that is because at the end of the day, whatever's left is got to be forgiven. So you paying more to it is just essentially reducing that final balance that you're going to have.
Right. Yeah. And those are dollars that can be used elsewhere, right? Every single dollar that you're paying, if you're going for the tax-free loan forgiveness, like public service loan forgiveness, and if you pay $100,000 towards your student loans, that $100,000 gone. If you could reduce it down to $50,000, well, in terms of your total payout, there's another $50,000 that you save. That's after tax money, right? So the objective is to reduce your payment as much as possible and find that optimal strategy.
Makes sense. And then 2 big buckets here now: public service loan forgiveness, or PSLF, as I heard it mentioned many times in my research. That took me a little bit to figure out what you guys meant whenever you're talking about that. And then taxable loan forgiveness. So that taxable loan forgiveness alludes to the fact that PSLF is not taxable. So PSLF, a 10-year plan, at the end of the 10 years, you the remaining of your balance will be forgiven, and you don't have to pay taxes on that, correct?
Exactly.
And then qualifications for that plan. What qualifications do you have to meet?
Yep. So number 1, you need to be working at a qualifying employer. That's a non-for-profit. That's a 501c3. It's a government entity, something in that realm.
Okay.
And then you do need to be working full-time at that employer. And so that's generally on, letter of the law, it says about 30 hours on average is what you need there. But this could be at multiple employers. You could be working part-time at 2 non-for-profits or qualifying employers. And as long as that nets to that 30 hours, then you meet that employment requirement. Another requirement, you have to be on an income-driven repayment program. There's four of those. Well, and so income-based repayment, income contingent repayment, revised pay-as-you-earn, and pay-as-you-earn. But the two repayment plans, if you're on an income-driven repayment, that you would want to focus on are revised pay-as-you-earn and pay-as-you-earn. Those other two, income-based repayment and income contingent repayment, are a bit of legacy programs and tend to be a little bit higher monthly payment. And
that's the difference between the 10% to 20%.
Exactly. Income contingent repayment is 20% of your paycheck, and income-based repayment is 15%, and pay-as-you-earn and repay-as-you-earn are only 10%.
Makes sense.
If you were making $1,000 a month and it was 20%, well, that's $200 a month that you'd be paying. An income contingent, it'd be $150 in income-based repayment, and then for repay and pay, it'd only be $100. So you could cut your payment in half by just being in the right income-driven repayment program. And then you do need 120 monthly payments. So that's 10 years of payments. It doesn't have to be continuous or all at the same employer. You can do 3 years and then, take a couple of years off and then come back and do 7 more years. But those are the requirements that you need to do with public service loan forgiveness. And you really have to dot your I's and cross your T's to do that, as there hasn't been great success thus far actually achieving that loan forgiveness program.
Okay. Makes sense. And then taxable loan forgiveness, these are 20-year plans or 25-year plans, once again, based on your income, as you were explaining through those four, and that remaining balance will be taxed. So if you have $25,000 left on your remaining loan, that is forgiven, but that's essentially included as income in your year's tax return, and then you're going to pay taxes on that, correct?
Yes, yeah, you will. So using your example of $25,000 that ends up after the 20 to 25 years of payments would be added to your tax return as income, and then you'd pay taxes on that in whatever tax bracket you're in. But I do want to make one clarification point on that. You don't have to be working at a non-for-profit or a 501c3. You can have any type of employment. You can be working 1 hour a week. You can be working 100 hours a week. It doesn't have a full-time or a part-time rule like public service loan forgiveness has. Lots more flexibility in terms of careers and your opportunities that you can pick with the long-term forgiveness track. But like I said, the numbers usually only work out when your debt is 3 or 4 times your income, just because you make those payments for a long period of time, and then you got to pay that tax bill at the end of the day. So
makes sense. Yeah, if you pay 240 payments and plus taxes, you probably got to end up paying out most of what you're going to have in student loans there. So
yeah,
totally makes sense. Anything else on forgiveness? I know that's pretty high level, but I think that gives people a taste. I'm sure some people are falling back in their chairs, maybe falling asleep right now. So I do want to keep the pace of this conversation going, but anything else before we move on from forgiveness?
Yeah. And also if you're working in like an underserved area, or you're working in a disadvantage, there's a number of other forgiveness programs that are out there, or if you work in the military, they have forgiveness programs. So the list isn't exhaustive of what we talked about today of just the taxable and the PSLF. There's a lot of other forgiveness programs. So if you're out there and you're trying to figure out, hey, what are my different options for forgiveness potentially, make sure you look into that. There's loan repayment assistance that employers offer sometimes, and also just loan repayment assistance based on your state. So keep that in mind as well.
So let's shift the conversation to the other side of the coin. These people that their income is significantly higher and their debt might be lower, but they still need to put together some kind of strategy around repayment. Let's talk refinance. What the hell is refinance? Whenever I say that word, I know it gets thrown around there a lot. I'm not really sure what that means. Does that constitute consolidation? Are those the same or different? How about you kind of knock this or start this conversation off for us?
Yeah. So refinance in its simplest sense is taking one of your existing loans or a number of existing loans and having a new lender pay that off for you and issuing you a new student loan. Okay. And it typically is done if you had 5 federal student loans. You could private refinance one of those, which means that that one federal student loan is paid off by that private student loan, and you're issued a new set of terms on that, whatever the private lender offers you. Okay. And, you can refinance 10 loans. You can refinance, federal and private student loans together. And, the reason why people do this is you typically are paying 6, 7, 8%, maybe somewhere in that range on your federal student loans, or even private student loans that you took out from school. And private refinancing can often allow you to get your interest rate down in half. So if you're paying 7% on $100,000 of student loans, that's $7,000 a year of growth. Just interest charge alone. If you could get that down to 3%, that changes your interest charge from 7 down to 3. That's $4,000 a year that you could save. And over a 10-year period of time, that's $40,000 after tax. And we're not even thinking about, the time value of money perspective, if you put that, in some type of an investment along the way. So.
Interesting. And I'm guessing now is probably a pretty good time to refinance with where interest rates are right now. What are some things that people can do maybe in the short term and this, maybe 6-month runway to get ready for refinance, maybe to even get a better rate? Is there any strategy or things that people can do?
Yes. So when you're refinancing private student loans, there's a number of things that when you're refinancing, they look at a number of things: your income, your job history, your credit, your, and what debt you have, what's your debt to income. So if you've got some high interest debt, maybe credit cards, I'd probably try to knock those out, get those out of the way. But I mean, those are the big things that you can do, and make sure that you have a clean credit report as well as you can do. So don't let those credit card payments go past due. And the other thing to be aware of is that interest rates have been really low, and they've been going down over the years. And a lot of people have stayed on the sidelines with the federal student loans at 0%. They're like, I'm taking this 0% holiday as long as I can.
Makes sense.
And now there is going to be a huge amount of people that are going to be private refinancing that no longer want to be paying those higher interest rates. They want to get their interest rate down. And so I think over the next little while, over a couple of years, rates are probably going to start getting pushed up, with inflation as the economy recovers out of COVID, and things will continue to work forward. It's just standard economics that as the demand, goes up, prices for the interest rates are going to continue to go up. And a point that I forgot to mention earlier is that there's no price, there's no cost to do a student loan
that
refinance.
blew me away. I did not realize that, because I was thinking about refinance from the mortgage side, and I knew there's some cost involved with refinancing. So it has to make sense in terms of offsetting some of the fees that came with refinancing. Then I heard through research that it doesn't cost any money to refinance. That seems like something that's probably worth looking at least once a year then, if you are on some private loans, or even if you have federal loans and you're kind of looking to or you're on this repayment plan, not forgiveness plan. I think it's probably worth setting up at least a calendar reminder every year, probably at the end of the year, whenever you're strategizing around just finances in general for the next year, to go figure out what interest rates are right now with some of these private lenders.
Yeah. And, something to keep in mind is if you have a life event that happens, you get married, or you get a new job, or you have a side hustle and your income goes up, and income fluctuates and changes, I would definitely go in and apply at the private lenders if you've already private refinanced your loan, because at this point in time, anytime you can get a lower rate, it's a no-brainer to refinance your loan again, because at the end of the day, if you can get a lower interest rate, you're going to end up paying out less in interest. That's more money in your pocket over the long run. So I think that once a year type thing, or, if you have a significant life change, definitely, check in and see what happens there, so you can get a lower rate.
And before people get trigger happy, and I caught some of those words in that sentence that you said there, if you already have private loans, there is some caveat that we probably want to put on refinancing federal loans into private loans. So what are some considerations that people should make before making that change?
Yeah. So if you private refinance your federal student loans into private loans, you're no longer eligible for, taxable or public service loan forgiveness or income driven repayment. And also a huge one that people sometimes aren't aware of is there's a death and disability discharge with federal student loans. So any loan balance that you have, if you became disabled or you passed away before your loans were paid off, those are discharged tax free. But now when you private refinance, most people co-sign with a spouse. When they private refinance, when you private refinance a mortgage, a lot of people will do that, right? And it makes the person who co-signed with you liable for those loans as well. So if you had $100,000 and let's say, in the event of death or disability, that $100,000 would be discharged, but it's not discharged tax free. Oftentimes it's taxed on whatever that loan balance is. And sometimes you just have to pay it off. There's no discharge of it. And it's very case by case from the different lenders. So just another thing to keep in mind when you're private refinancing is that you lose a number of federal protections by doing that. And then if you also wanted to put your payments on hold and go into forbearance, with federal student loans, they tend to be quite generous where you can do that for a long period of time. But with private student loans, they have stricter requirements on when you can actually go into forbearance and the length of the period that you're in it.
Makes sense. But I don't want to scare people away from that because private refinance makes a lot of sense for people.
Yeah.
There's kind of, through this research, one of two camps, this kind of fast and furious. So they see the debt out there and they're just trying to pay it off as fast as they can. And that probably makes sense for a lot of people, especially if student loans are your only debt. There is some conversation. If you want to look a little bit further into it, I just Google good debt versus bad debt to start to understand that. From the simplest form, obviously pay off your highest the debt that has the highest interest rate. But I realize there's also this psychological factor with debt as well. Then there's the slow burn piece to it as well. You have a monthly payment, and of course, make those monthly payments so you're not getting penalized or more interest isn't accruing. But many people, student loans isn't the only goal in mind, the only finance goal in mind. There's so many competing goals with saving for a house or upgrading your car or investing for your retirement, or even just having some splurges in your life. So many of us are getting off the college life where we picked up free furniture and lived in some of the cheapest places that we can find, and that we just want to upgrade some of our lifestyle as well. Talk to me a little bit about those conversations that you're having with your clients around whenever they have competing goals.
Yeah, it's the old, should I be paying off my debt as soon as possible, or should I end up extending this out over a longer period of time? That, and if you do a longer loan payoff term, like if you did a 5-year versus a 20-year, that can be a huge difference in monthly cash flow. Because then if you do the shorter payment term or the longer payment term, it's usually going to allow you to put more money into retirement. And then to have, like I do like a vacation fund as well, that we save up money every single year so that we can go and have fun, right? And not just, oh, hey, kind of spur of the moment, there's killer flights to Spain, let's go do that, where we have some money set aside. And so there's this, and everybody feels a little bit differently about student loan debt. Should I be, extending out my student loan term as long as possible, because I can get a 3% interest rate on my student loans, through private refinancing, and I can get 10% in the market, or I can get 8% through real estate, year after year, and that's a 5 to 7% amount of money that I'm making on keeping my looking at terms of the different interest rates that you have. And I think it depends. Some people are like, I really want to get this monkey off my back. It is debilitating. It is stressing me out. It's causing burnout, and this is crushing me, and I just want to have that done. And if you're in that camp, then we're going to get your goals lined up with that and get that done as soon as you can, so that you can start fulfilling all the different goals that you have. But others are like, I think about it a little bit more like an income tax. I pay, $500 a month for the next 20 years, and that's going to allow me to have a better lifestyle. And then, at that point in time, that money that I would be paying on a 5-year payment plan, I'm putting that in some other type of investment. So financially, I'm going to come out better. And if you're disciplined and you can do that, you can definitely make a case for that. And I kind of fall a little bit in the middle there, where I think you should absolutely be paying yourself, putting money into retirement accounts, and then after that, paying down your student loans, in a timely manner.
Sure. That's everybody's personal decision. And I think you've done a really great job laying out multiple different options for people. I can tell how excited you are about this subject matter. And that is because you do this for a living, man. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about student loan advice, what you guys do, who you can help, and then we'll share out some links if people want to get connected.
Yeah, very simply put, we were created to help you figure out the best way to manage your student loans, not have to stress about them, and be able to focus on the things that matter to you. I tend to work with people that have about $50,000 in student loans and more. I've met with people that have $1 million in student loans, or even above that. It's all across the board. And we do one-on-one consultations with you, taking into consideration, marital status, your income, your job, what are your goals, and factor that all into an optimal payoff strategy, whether it's utilizing loan forgiveness or it's going down that more kind of aggressive pay down strategy, which sometimes factors in private refinancing. We answer any and all of your questions on student loans, and we do that all in a one-hour session and give you the tools to move forward and get these behind you as soon as possible.
So awesome. And if people want to learn more, they can go to studentloanadvice.com/SIR. You can support the show by doing that as well. You really do provide some value here. I think people with an hour-long consultation can really save a ton of money, have a little bit more confidence around what the repayment strategy is, and just alleviate some of the anxiety that student loans come with. It was overwhelming for me to start with. I only scratched the surface with all the material out there. If you are somebody that is a student and wants to learn a little bit more about this and build some more confidence as well, just going out to your website and perusing your blog, I think is well worth it. You have lots of good content out there. You're also on some other podcasts. So you can Google Andrew's name and you can find him out on some other podcasts if you really like this audio format. Andrew, before I ask my last question, anywhere else that you would like to direct people to if they want to learn more about you, hear some more about you, and just stay connected in general?
Yeah, I'm on social media. I'm on in Instagram, so I'm continually updating information there. So it's at Student Loan Advice. That's how you can find us there on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you're interested in LinkedIn, I don't have a business side, but you can just go directly to my Andrew Paulson, CSLP. It's where you can follow me, where I'm regularly trying to keep you updated on what's new, what's happening, what's changing in the student loan realm, because there's a lot going on there. And I will say also that if you have no idea where to start, we can help you there. Or if you already have a great student loan plan and you just want to make sure that this is well oiled, we can help you with that as well.
Awesome. My final question for you, Andrew. If you had the opportunity to teach a 16-week class to a group of graduating college seniors, what would you teach and how would you teach it?
It would be on financial literacy. Some of the components would be, basic personal finance. How do you invest? Why should I invest? What are the things that I should be considering? How much do I need to save up over the years to be able to retire? Also in there would be a component of how to talk about, what to do with your student loans, if you have them, because so many of people out there, 44 million people out there in the US do. There's a lot of confusion on that, and just how to budget, how to not overspend, so much in the financial literacy. Also another big one is taxes. Yeah. So many people don't understand what are, deductions that you can be taking, and a lot of you could probably be filing your taxes on your own using, one of the simple services out there and saving a couple $100. That's a thing that should probably just be a requirement for people to understand, because so many of my clients that maybe didn't study, they didn't do any business classes in school. Maybe they're a teacher, or they're in public health, or they're in healthcare, and they don't have a whole lot of training around that, because there's such a big need for that. And there's definitely a big gap there.
As much as I would wish that we didn't have to educate ourselves around personal finance, we do. And the faster you get educated in that, the faster you can start helping yourself. So I think it would be a phenomenal course. I would love to put people through more than just one 16-week class on personal finance. I think many of the topics that you mentioned right there could be a whole class in their own. But at minimum, just educating yourself a little bit on some of these topics could save you hundreds of dollars, and therefore lots of stress, lots of time, lots of energy in the near future. So Andrew, it's been an absolute blast. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I had such a blast researching you. Really excited to see what's in store for you next year with all of the student loans coming back on, and how crazy things might get for you.
Thanks so much, Justin. Pleasure being on with you today.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you like this conversation today, be sure to subscribe so you'll be notified about new episodes. If you want to connect with me, send me a message on Instagram. I'm at Justin Lee Peters. You can find show notes with links to everything we discussed today at justinpeters.co. This episode was produced by Gabby Dimeke. I'm your host, Justin Peters. Thanks for tuning in.